Tonight, we embark on an incredible historical journey into the collapse of Rome, the world's most formidable empire. Picture yourself in an age when vast armies traversed Europe and cities glittered with marble. This is a true account of how a powerful empire disintegrated, featuring compelling figures, epic conflicts, and unexpected turns. Perhaps you would like to dim the lights and get comfortable under your blankets as we travel back through time together. Congratulations! You have just woken up in the Roman Empire of the late 4th century. The good news is that you are in the most powerful civilization on Earth, controlling lands from Britain to Egypt and from Spain to Mesopotamia. Cities linked by remarkable roads sprawl across the terrain, featuring aqueducts that deliver fresh water and magnificent structures that display Rome's riches and authority. The unfortunate reality, situations are about to become significantly more complex. It is 376 AD, and you find yourself near the powerful Danube River, the northern frontier of the Roman Empire. The air is cool with autumn chill, and you can see your breath fog as you witness an incredible spectacle unfold before you. Thousands of men, women, children, and elders are gathered on the far bank of the river, desperately calling to the Roman soldiers on your side. Who are they, you ask a Roman guard beside you. Goths, he replies, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Barbarians from beyond our borders. They beg Emperor Valens to allow them to cross and settle within the empire. You observe these so-called barbarians more closely. They do not appear particularly fearsome now. In fact, they look frightened. Many carry only the few possessions they could bring, and children cling to their parents. Their clothing is simpler than Roman fashions, yet they are not the wild monsters Roman stories often describe. But why do they wish to enter the empire? You wonder aloud. The guard gives you a curious look. Haven't you heard? The Huns have arrived in their lands, terrifying horse warriors from the east. These Goths prefer Roman clemency over confronting the Huns. You observe Roman officials meeting Gothic leaders by the river. After discussion, the Romans seem to reach a decision. The guard nods grimly. Emperor Valens has agreed to allow them to cross. These men will serve in our armies, and their families may settle here. More soldiers for Rome and a buffer against the Huns. Clever, wouldn't you say? But you notice he doesn't sound convinced of his own words. His expression suggests worry about what is to come. The following months confirm his concerns. You travel to a settlement where the Goths have been placed and find the conditions are terrible. Roman officials, you know, the people in fancy togas with important expressions, are supposed to be providing food and supplies to the newcomers. Instead, they offer basic necessities at exorbitant prices, compelling the Goths to sell their children into slavery merely to escape starvation. This is unjust, you muse, observing a Gothic woman exchange her golden earrings, likely a family heirloom, for a small sack of grain. A young Gothic man nearby overhears you. No, that is not true. He speaks surprisingly good Latin and agrees. We sought protection, offering our service to Rome. This is how we are treated. His hands clenched into fists. There is talk among our people. Some suggest we should fight back. His words prove prophetic. By 378 AD, just 2 years after crossing the Danube, the mistreated Goths had risen in rebellion. You have arrived at the eastern imperial capital of Constantinople, where alarming news spreads through the city. Emperor Valens is marching with a great army to suppress the Gothic uprising. In the Grand Palace, you witness advisors urging caution. Await Gratian and his reinforcements from the west, one general. The Goths outnumber our scouts first reported, yet Valerius, with a dismissive wave of his jeweled hand, dismisses this counsel. I shall not share the triumph with my young nephew. They are only savages. They cannot withstand a proper Roman army. Pride precedes a downfall, as they say. And you soon hear devastating news from a place known as Adrianople or Hadrianople, one of those ancient cities with varying spellings depending on the source. On August 9, 378 AD, Emperor Valens led his army against the Goths, expecting an easy victory. Instead, the Roman forces were overwhelmed. The emperor himself was killed, along with nearly 2/3 of his army. Thousands of trained soldiers were lost in a single afternoon. It was a disaster. People weep in the streets of Constantinople. It is the worst defeat since Cana during the wars with Hannibal centuries ago. You understand the shock. The Romans were accustomed to defeating so-called barbarians. This was unexpected. It is like watching a champion boxer knocked out by someone who has never stepped into a ring. In the aftermath, you meet a young Roman officer who survived the battle, his arm in a sling and his eyes haunted by what he witnessed. "We underestimated them," he tells you quietly. These weren't disorganized tribesmen. The Gothic cavalry attacked with discipline and coordination, and their leader, Frune, he outsmarted our commanders at every turn. "What happens now?" you ask. He looks at you grimly. Everything has changed. The Goths remain within our borders, armed and dangerous, and now they recognize their capacity to defeat us. This change is undeniable. The new emperor, Theodosius I, eventually made peace with the Goths in 382 AD, but on terms unimaginable before the Battle of Adrianople. The Goths were permitted to settle within Roman territory as a semi-autonomous group with their own leaders and laws. This marks the start of a new pattern. Barbarians reside within the empire, yet remain outside of it. Over the ensuing decades, you observe groups crossing Roman boundaries, either by force or invitation. Though the empire still seems mighty externally, subtle shifts are evident. Rome increasingly depends on barbarian soldiers to guard its borders, even as those frontiers become progressively indistinct. By the early 5th century, you are in the western half of the empire, facing greater challenges than the east. The wealthy eastern provinces around Constantinople remain relatively secure, but the west is struggling. You are in Ravenna, a city shielded by surrounding marshes, which now serves as the Western imperial capital instead of Rome. This change was made for defense, a troubling sign of the times. Within Ravenna's palace, you see the powerful Roman general Stilicho, who is half Vandal by birth. Despite this heritage, he is fiercely devoted to Rome's defense, acting as guardian to the young emperor, Honorius. The situation is worsening. Stilicho shares with his advisors, believing no one else is listening, troops have been pulled from Britain to defend Italy. The Rhine frontier is now lightly defended. And now the Goths are moving again, led by a new king named Alaric. This Alaric, you learn, once served in the Roman military. Now he leads his people, the Visigoths, with ambition and cunning. He seeks official recognition, land, and payment from the empire. When these demands are unmet, he resorts to threats and violence. In 401 and 402 AD, Alaric invaded Italy, though Stilicho managed to drive him back. But the empire faces threats from multiple directions. In 405, another Gothic leader, Ratagisus, invaded with a large force before being defeated by Stilicho near Florence. Then comes the devastating winter of 4647 AD. The Rhine River, which normally serves as a natural barrier protecting Roman Gaul, freezes solid enough for an army to cross. And cross they do. Vandals, Alans, Suevi, and others crossed the frozen river on December 31, 406, breaching Rome's weakened defenses and plundering the wealthy provinces beyond. Stilicho, despite his achievements, was undone by court politics. In 408 AD, he was executed for treason, charges you, having witnessed his loyalty to Rome, know to be untrue. His death removed the Western Empire's most capable defender at a critical juncture. With Stilicho's demise, little impedes Alaric and his Visigoths. They march into Italy once more, setting their sights on Rome itself. The Eternal City, though diminished as an administrative center, endures as the symbolic heart of the empire it names. In 410 AD, you stand on Rome's ancient walls, watching Gothic warriors surround the city. Citizens already suffer hunger from the Visigothic blockade. The situation is hopeless. An elderly senator, voice trembling, states no relief army is coming. The emperor remains safe in Ravenna, but we are abandoned. On August 24, 410 AD, the unthinkable occurs. The Salarian Gate is opened. Whether by treachery or desperation, accounts vary, and Alaric's warriors pour into Rome. For 3 days, the world-ruling city endures plunder and partial ruin. You observe the Goths seizing palaces and mansions, carrying away gold, silver, and precious art. However, not total devastation ensues. Alaric, who once served Rome, commands his forces to honor the churches and those seeking refuge within them. Nevertheless, fires ignite in some areas, and the ancient Senate House is consumed by flames. As you assist a Roman family in concealing their most cherished belongings, the father whispers in disbelief, "Rome has not been overrun by a foreign foe in nearly 8 centuries. How could this be?" As you observe smoke rising from various parts of the Eternal City, you contemplate the same mystery. The Roman Empire remains mighty, poised to endure for decades more in the West and centuries more in the East. Yet, something essential has shifted. Rome's invincibility is gone. The certainty of its eternal dominance was shattered like a clay pot dropped on marble floors. Alaric does not remain to rule Rome. After the sacking, he leads his people south, apparently aiming for Africa, Rome's granary, and a wealthy prize. But he never reaches it. The great Gothic king dies of illness near Cosenza in southern Italy, and his followers bury him with great treasure in the bed of the temporarily diverted Bucicento River. They restore the river to its original course, ensuring the grave's location remains a lifelong secret. The next Gothic king, Athol, brother-in-law of Alaric, leads the Visigoths from Italy into southern Gaul, establishing a kingdom centered on Tus. A barbarian group has found a lasting home within former Roman lands, and they are not alone. The Vandals, crossing the Rhine in 406, moved through Gaul and into Spain. Under their king Gizeric, they seized control over sections of the Iberian Peninsula, yet Africa offered greater riches. In 429 AD, Giza led approximately 80,000 Vandals and allied Alans, including women and children, across the Strait of Gibraltar. The Roman provinces of North Africa, largely immune to barbarian incursions until then, fell sequentially to the Vandal advance. In 439 AD, Giza captured Carthage, the most significant city in Roman Africa. The loss is catastrophic for the Western Empire. Africa was its richest remaining territory, providing tax revenue and crucially grain shipments to feed Rome itself. As you walk through the Forum of Carthage, now under Vandal control, a Roman merchant explains the significance. "Without Africa's grain and taxes, the Western Empire is crippled," he says grimly. "The East still has Egypt and its wealth. But what does the West have now? Italy ravaged by war, Gaul and Spain overrun by barbarians. Britain surrendered to its destiny. You begin to grasp that what you observe is not merely a temporary crisis, but a profound metamorphosis of the Roman world. The Western provinces are not simply suffering barbarian raids, they are being settled by new peoples who are establishing their own kingdoms on former Roman territory. And on the distant eastern frontier beyond the Mediterranean, you have discovered a new force that is growing stronger. Under their fearsome leader, Attila, the Huns will soon threaten both halves of the Roman Empire, adding strain to an already burdened system. However, that narrative must wait for another time. Let us pause now and reflect on what we have learned about the beginning of Rome's decline, how a great civilization was gradually transformed by the peoples. Once viewed as uncivilized outsiders, the Roman Empire did not collapse suddenly, as if in an earthquake. Instead, it evolved incrementally, territory by territory, adapting to new realities until it transformed into something its founders would barely recognize. As you drift to sleep, imagine yourself standing on the ancient walls of Rome in 410, witnessing history unfold before you, the end of one era and the start of another, all playing out in slow motion across decades and centuries. It is now the 440s AD, and you find yourself in the eastern imperial capital of Constantinople. The magnificent city, safeguarded by colossal walls featuring splendid churches and palaces, thrived on trade from the known world. While the Eastern Empire remained wealthy and strong, the western half contended with barbarian settlements and lost territories. Within the imperial palace, you see officials gathered around maps, their expressions serious, discussing alarming reports from the frontier concerning the Huns, those nomadic warriors who, decades prior, drove the Goths to seek sanctuary within the empire, have now united under a formidable new leader. Attila, one official remarks, almost whispering the name, as if fearing to invoke its master. He and his brother Blade have seized control of all the Hunnic tribes. They demand more gold than we have ever paid. Another official, older and dressed in the elaborate robes of high office, shakes his head. We have paid tribute for years to keep them at peace, but these new demands are impossible. The treasury cannot bear it. You soon learn that the Huns have been Rome's northern neighbors for some time. Previous Eastern emperors established a pattern of paying them annual tribute to prevent raids on Roman territory. It was an uncomfortable arrangement that generally maintained peace. Now, under Attila's leadership, the Huns demand more, much more. When diplomatic negotiations fail, the result is immediate and devastating. In 441 AD, Attila led his warriors across the Danube and into the Balkans. Traveling to the region, you witness the aftermath of the Hunnic attacks. Towns and villages lie in ruins, and their inhabitants have fled or been captured. Roman forces appear powerless against the swift-moving Hunnish horsemen who suddenly strike with terrible force and vanish before a proper defense can be organized. How do they move so quickly? When asked a Roman cavalry officer who survived an encounter with the Huns, he explains that their entire lives are spent on horseback. They eat, drink, and sleep while riding. Furthermore, their bows allow them to shoot with deadly accuracy at full gallop. We have never encountered such a situation. By 443, the Eastern Romans were compelled to accept Attila's demands, tripling the annual tribute to 2,100 gold and paying a massive sum for past arrears. This was a humiliating concession, but the alternative was continued devastation of the Balkan provinces. In 445, Attila became the sole ruler of the Hunnic Empire after his brother Blada died under mysterious circumstances. Many speculate that Attila himself was responsible. Now unchallenged, his power reaches its zenith. His domain spans from the Rhine to the Caspian Sea, with numerous Germanic peoples serving as his subjects or allies. Even the mighty Eastern Roman Empire pays him tribute. You have heard many rumors about this fearsome leader. Therefore, when you get a chance to join a Roman diplomatic mission to Attila's camp, you seize the opportunity. The journey takes you beyond the Danube into territories that were once Roman but now acknowledge Hunnic overlordship. Attila's headquarters surprises you. Unlike the stone cities of the Romans, the Hunnic capital is mostly wooden. The largest and most impressive part is reserved for Attila himself. It is not primitive, as Romans often described barbarian settlements, but rather adapted to a people who prioritize mobility over permanence. When Attila finally receives the Roman delegation, you get your first look at the man called the Scourge of God. He is not the giant of legend. In reality, he is short and stout with a broad chest and a large head. His attire is plain compared to his nobles, featuring little ornamentation save a notable sword at his belt, yet his eyes draw your focus. Intense and vigilant, missing nothing, the Roman ambassador offers lavish gifts which Attila accepts indifferently. He rests on a wooden throne, listening impassively as ornate diplomatic speeches are rendered by interpreters. Though he does not speak Latin or Greek, he seems to grasp much of what is said prior to translation. Later, at a feast honoring the ambassador, you observe Attila closely. While his followers drink from ornate gold and silver cups, many clearly looted from Roman territories, Attila himself uses a simple wooden cup and eats from a wooden plate. He remains sober while many of his warriors become drunk and boisterous. A Roman diplomat nearby notices your interest. "Do not be deceived by his simplicity," he murmurs. "It is calculated." He portrays himself as untouched by luxury to his followers, even while demanding gold from Rome. Truly clever. The diplomat continues sharing what he has learned about this mysterious leader. They say he found an ancient sword buried in the earth, the weapon of their war god. He asserts it grants him the divine right to rule the world. His people regard him as a god-king. Whether divine or not, Attila is undeniably a shrewd politician. He utilizes a supposed insult to justify his actions, as a Roman official allegedly planned to assassinate him, providing a pretext to break the peace with the Eastern Empire again. In 447, he launched another massive invasion of the Balkans, defeating a Roman army at the Battle of the Eutos River and nearly reached the walls of Constantinople. The eastern capital was saved by its formidable defenses. The mighty Theodosian walls proved too formidable even for Alar's armies. However, the surrounding countryside is devastated, and the Eastern Empire must once more negotiate peace on even more humiliating terms. In 450 AD, the political scene changes. Theodosius II, Emperor of the East, dies from a fall from his horse. His successor, Marcian, is more resolute and refuses to continue paying tribute to the Huns. Simultaneously, Attila's gaze shifts west toward the struggling western half of the empire. This Western Empire is now governed by Emperor Valentinian III, though true authority lies with his general Flavius Aetius. Remarkably, Aetius once lived among the Huns as a hostage in his youth and understands their customs intimately. He also employed Hunnic mercenaries earlier in his career to secure his position in Rome. If anyone can confront the Hunnic threat, it is he. Attila found a convenient pretext to invade the West. Honoria, sister of Emperor Valentinian, sent Attila her ring and a message seeking his aid, apparently to escape an unwanted marriage. Attila interpreted this as a proposal and demanded half of the Western Empire as her dowry. When Valentinian refused, Attila prepared for war, gathering a massive force including his Huns and contingents from various subject peoples. In 451 AD, this mighty army crosses the Rhine and invades Gaul. Traveling ahead, you witness the terror before Attila's advance. Cities are deserted, their inhabitants fleeing with what they could carry. Those unable to escape plead for aid. The Huns' reputation for brutality has spread widely. In this desperate time, you observe something remarkable: former enemies uniting against a common threat. In Gaul, Aetius executes a diplomatic triumph, forging a coalition comprising Roman forces, Visigoths under King Theodoric Thar, Alans, Burgundians, Franks and Saxons. This alliance unites peoples who had frequently contended with one another. A battle looms, a clash that could decide the fate of Western Europe. You travel to the Catalanian Plains, also known as the Catalanian Fields, near the city of Troy in northeastern Gaul. In the summer of 451 AD, the two great armies finally met. The confrontation was breathtaking in scale, with tens of thousands of warriors facing each other across the rolling plains. Attila's forces comprised his Hunnish horsemen and subject Germanic peoples like the Ostrogoths, while Aetius commanded his Romanoic coalition, including his own Roman troops, which formed only a fraction of the diverse army. The battle commenced with skirmishes as both sides tested their strength. A fierce struggle ensues over a commanding ridge that dominates the battlefield, with neither side yielding easily. King Theodoric of the Visigoths is slain in the melee, but his son inspires his warriors to fight on with renewed determination, seeking vengeance for their fallen leader. As sunset approaches, the field is littered with the dead and wounded. Attila's forces have been forced back to their wagon circle, preparing for a final stand. But Aetius, perhaps wary of what complete victory might mean, would not press the attack as darkness fell, wary of the Hunnic threat. Attila prepared a funeral pyre of saddles. If his defenses were breached the next day, he planned to throw himself into the flames rather than be captured. However, the expected attack never came. By morning, Attila had withdrawn some of his forces, leaving a path for retreat. And retreat he does. For the first time, the great conqueror has been stopped. Though not decisively defeated, his aura of invincibility is broken. The West has been saved for now, but Attila is not finished. In 452 AD, he invades Italy itself. You follow the news of his advance with dread, knowing that the Western Empire has committed most of its military strength to the defense of Gaul. Italy lies relatively unprotected. City after city falls to the Hunnic advance. Milan is occupied, and Attila occupies the imperial throne there, a deliberate slight to Roman authority. As his armies advance toward Rome, fear grips the Eternal City. Will Rome endure a fate worse than the Gothic sack of 410? In this moment of crisis, an unusual embassy departs Rome to meet Attila, led not by a general or imperial official, but by Pope Leo the Fern. You join the papal entourage out of curiosity, wondering what a religious leader could possibly offer that might turn back the Hun king. The meeting occurs near Mantua at the River Po. Pope Leo, dignified in his clerical robes, addresses Attila with calm authority. The content of their conversation was not recorded, but the outcome is evident. Following the meeting, Attila ordered his army to withdraw from Italy. Later legends assert that Attila witnessed the apostles Peter and Paul floating above the Pope's head, threatening him with divine retribution if he attacked Rome. A more practical explanation suggests that Attila's army was afflicted by disease and food shortages, and the Eastern Empire was encroaching upon his territories on the Danube. Regardless of the cause, Rome was spared. The following year, 453 AD, brought unexpected news: Attila was dead. The circumstances were anticlimactic for such a legendary figure. After celebrating his marriage to many wives, he suffered a nosebleed in his sleep and choked on his own blood. Some whisper of poison or assassination, but nothing is proven. You might think Attila's death would bring relief to the Roman world, and in some ways it does. But it also generates new difficulties. The Hunnic Empire, sustained mainly by Attila's charisma, starts to break apart as his sons contend for rule. Various subject groups exploit this chance to revolt, and the map of Central and Eastern Europe is redrawn once more. For the Western Roman Empire, the result is contradictory. As the Hunnic danger lessens, the empire loses a factor that had in certain ways provided stability through fear. Germanic peoples previously constrained by Hunnic power are now free to pursue their own ambitions, frequently to the detriment of Rome. Following Attila's death, you find yourself in Ravenna, witnessing a tense meeting between Emperor Valentinian III and his general Aetius, the man who saved the empire from the Huns. Despite Aetius's service, Valentinian harbors resentment toward his general's authority and influence. On September 21, 454 AD, while Aetius presented a financial report to the emperor, Valentinian suddenly drew his sword and killed him. As the general lay dying on the palace floor, a courtier remarked, "You have cut off your right hand with your left." The words proved true. Without Aetius, the Western Empire lost its most capable defender. 6 months later, Valentinian himself was assassinated by 2 of Aetius's former guards, seeking vengeance for their commander. The Western imperial throne is passed to a succession of short-lived emperors, none possessing the strength or backing to halt the empire's decline. Actual power increasingly resides with military commanders, many of barbarian descent, who appoint and dismiss emperors at will. Amidst these political intrigues, a surprising development is unfolding in North Africa. Geyser, king of the Vandals, has established a powerful fleet, an unprecedented feat for a Germanic people. In 455 AD, only 3 months after Valentinian's murder, this fleet arrives at the mouth of the Tiber. Rome, still recovering from the Gothic sack of 410, now confronts another invasion. Lacking significant forces to defend itself, the city yields its gates to the Vandals. Pope Leo attempts to intercede again, as he did with Aella, but with diminished success. He only manages to obtain a promise that the city and its people will not be burned or slaughtered. For 14 days, the Vandals systematically plundered Rome, stripping it of valuables in a far more thorough operation than the Gothic sack 45 years prior. They seized not only gold and silver, but also copper from roofs, fine furniture, and even the Empress Eudoxia, widow of Valentinian, and her daughters as captives. When they departed, they left behind a city materially impoverished yet still standing. The term vandalism stems from this event, although historians observe that the Vandals were actually more disciplined and less destructive than their reputation implies. Contrary to the popular image of mindless destruction, Gazaric's plunder was calculated and strategic. He took assets of value that could be transported. By this time you have witnessed the loss of Britain, much of Gaul and Spain, and North Africa. Italy itself has suffered multiple invasions. The Western Empire persists nominally, yet its territory has significantly diminished and its authority weakened by the year. In 468 AD, both Eastern and Western empires launch a final great effort to reclaim their standing. Their target is Vandal North Africa, the former Western Territory's richest province and a strategic nexus for Mediterranean control. The Eastern Emperor Leo I commits massive resources to this campaign, reportedly involving over 1,000 ships and 100,000 men. Though perhaps overstated, this is the largest naval expedition the Mediterranean has witnessed in centuries. If successful, it could restore the West's economic base and initiate a Roman revival. You secure passage on a supply vessel, keen to observe this pivotal historical moment. The immense fleet gathers in Sicily before departing for Africa, with the Western Emperor Anthemius also contributing forces. Though most men and ships originate from the wealthy East, hope is strong among the Roman troops and sailors. Many expect this campaign to reverse the tide and restore Roman glory. The Vandals, despite their seafaring skill, appear outnumbered and inferior. However, Gaiseric, the Vandal king, is in his 70s and has not endured this long by being easily defeated. As the Roman fleet nears Cape Bon near Carthage, the Vandals execute a brilliant strategy. Utilizing fire ships, vessels carrying flammable materials, and igniting them, they attacked with a favorable wind behind them. Fire quickly spread among the closely packed Roman ships. Panic erupted as sailors and soldiers sought escape from the flames. What should have been a decisive Roman victory turned into a catastrophic defeat. The bulk of the fleet was destroyed, along with the last true chance to reconquer North Africa. You barely survive, clinging to debris until rescued by one of the few surviving Roman ships. Aboard, exhausted and half-drowned, you overhear sailors muttering that the Western Empire is truly doomed. A grizzled veteran plainly states the truth. Without Africa, there is no funds for soldiers, and without soldiers, there is no empire. As the African coast recedes into the distance, you reflect on how dramatically the Roman world has changed in a single century. From the Goths' arrival at the Danube in 376 to the failed African expedition of 468, you have witnessed a profound transformation, the slow, incremental dismantling of the Western Roman Empire. However, the final act of this historical drama is yet to unfold. The empire's shadow still falls upon Italy, and the proud name of Rome remains in the imperial government of Ravenna. For a little while longer, at least the concept of Rome will endure, even as its reality diminishes, like the setting sun over the Mediterranean. It is the year 470 AD, and you find yourself returned to Italy, the heartland of the declining Western Empire. The failed expedition against the Vandals depleted the remaining military and financial assets of Western Rome. Though the empire persists in memory and documentation, its actual territory has severely contracted, now encompassing only Italy and limited parts of Gaul and Alatia. Imperial authority is increasingly symbolic, even within these territories. In Ravenna, the Western imperial capital, a peculiar political scene unfolds. Emperor Anthimus reigns officially, yet true authority resides with his barbarian commander-in-chief, Rica Ricimer. A man of mixed heritage, part Suevi, part Visigoth, Ricimer has been the power behind the throne for years, wielding the power to make and unmake emperors by his will. This is an open secret, revealed by a Roman official as you stroll through Ravenna's marble-lined streets. Anthemius was appointed by the Eastern Emperor, yet he lacked the support of Ricimer, and their relationship was strained. This tension soon escalated into open conflict. In 472 AD, Ricimer besieged Anthemius in Rome. Following a 5-month siege marked by famine and suffering for the city's inhabitants, Ricimer's forces succeeded. Anthemius, disguised as a beggar, attempted to escape but was captured and executed. Ricimer then placed his own candidate Ulrius upon the imperial throne. Yet both men succumbed to natural causes within months, creating a power vacuum in an already fragile situation. This pattern repeats with the next emperor, Glycerius, who was appointed without Eastern consent and subsequently deposed when Chulio-Nepos arrived from Constantinople, supported by the East, in 474 AD. Nepos compelled Glycerius to become a bishop and assumed the throne himself. It resembles watching children play musical chairs, remarks an aging senator while observing the ceremonies installing yet another emperor. However, the music is a funeral dirge for Rome. Behind these imperial puppet shows, actual power increasingly shifts to military commanders of barbarian origin and their armies. The Western Empire simply lacks the resources to sustain a purely Roman army. Its defense now increasingly relies on federated barbarian troops led by their own chieftains. In 475 AD, another commander makes his move. Orestes, a former secretary of Attila the Hun, who has risen to become master of soldiers, magister militum in the Western Empire, rebels against Nepos and drives him from Italy back to Delalatia. Rather than take the throne himself, Orestes proclaims his young son Romulus as emperor. The boy, likely 12, is mockingly called Augustus. Little Augustus, a diminutive form that sadly contrasts with the name of Rome's revered first emperor, Augustus. Few would have guessed this child would be the last to bear the title of Western Roman Emperor. Meeting young Romulus at the imperial palace in Ravenna reveals him to be a solemn, bewildered boy, clearly a pawn in his father's political ambitions. He dons the imperial purple and performs ceremonial duties. Yet decisions rest with the Orestes. "Do you enjoy being emperor?" you ask him during a quiet moment away from court officials. The boy looks at you with sad eyes that seem too old for his face. "I do what my father tells me." He insists I must be brave like the original Romulus who founded Rome, but I hear the soldiers talking when they think I'm not listening. They say I'll be the last emperor, not the first. His words prove prophetic. In 476 AD, the barbarian troops forming the backbone of the Western army, Heruli, Syrians and Rheans, demanded something new from Orestes: permanent settlements in Italy, 1/3 of the land to claim. This mirrors the pattern in other former Western provinces where barbarian soldiers receive territory in exchange for military service. However, Orestes refuses. Italy is an exception. He asserts it is the heart of the empire, not a frontier province to be divided for foreign forces. This refusal sparks a mutiny led by Odoacer, an officer of Syrian descent who ascended through the ranks of the Roman army. You observe the rapid demise of Orestes' authority as soldiers throughout Italy pledge allegiance to Odoacer. Orestes escapes to Pavia, where he is captured and executed on August 28, 476 AD. Subsequently, Odoacer's armies advance into Ravenna. On September 4th, the date historians mark as the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Odoacer confronts young Romulus Augustus. You manage to enter the palace with officials and witness this pivotal moment. Surprisingly, there is no grand drama, no clash of armies or thunderous proclamations. Instead, Odoacer approaches the boy emperor with an almost gentle demeanor. He explains that Romulus must relinquish the throne, assuring him that he will face no harm. "You are still young," Odoacer tells him. "You will have a comfortable life away from these burdens." The child, looking relieved rather than distressed, removes the imperial regalia, the purple cloak, diadem, and other symbols of an office that has grown increasingly meaningless. Odoacer accepts them with a nod. Later, Romulus was granted a generous annual pension of 6,000 gold salii and sent to reside in a former imperial villa in Campania with his relatives. This is a surprisingly merciful end for a deposed ruler, especially when compared to the violent fates of many of his predecessors. What follows is even more interesting. Instead of proclaiming himself emperor, Odoacer chooses a different course of action. He conveys the imperial regalia to Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, accompanied by a carefully phrased message. Italy's Odoacer proposes abolishing its own emperor. Odoacer will govern Italy as King Rex, acknowledging Zeno as the sole emperor of a theoretically unified Roman Empire. This is a shrewd political move. Odoacer secures legitimacy through Eastern acknowledgement while preserving practical autonomy. Zeno, after hesitation and failed attempts to restore Nepos, who still claims the Western throne from his exile in Dalmatia, accepts the arrangement. Is the empire truly fallen? You ask a Roman jurist as you watch Odoacer's troops take control of Ravenna's government buildings. He considers the question thoughtfully. In law, no, there is still a Roman emperor in Constantinople. Odoacer rules in his name, but in truth. He gestures toward the barbarian soldiers guarding the former imperial palace. Observe this change. Rome has become something new. Whether this signifies a fall or a transformation depends entirely on one's viewpoint. For many ordinary Italians, life remains largely unchanged. Odoacer preserves much of the established Roman administrative structure. The Senate still convenes in Rome, and Roman laws remain in effect. Catholic Christianity is the dominant religion, yet Odoacer himself was an Arian Christian, similar to many Germanic peoples. Traveling through Italy during the early years of Odoacer's reign, one finds the transition was surprisingly smooth in many regions. In the countryside, large estates, known as latifundia, continued to operate as they had for centuries, although some lands had been distributed to Odoacer's followers. Municipal governments in cities continue to function, albeit with fewer resources. A city councillor in Milan explains that the major change is that tax revenue no longer funds an imperial court and army. Odoacer's requirements were less extensive and his army was smaller. In some respects, this has actually reduced the burden on ordinary citizens. However, if Italy achieved stability under its barbarian king, the situation becomes more complicated outside its borders. In Gaul, the Visigothic kingdom continues to expand its territory by displacing the remaining Roman enclaves. The Burgundians hold the Rhan Valley. Various Frankish groups govern northern Gaul, led by Clovis, who began unifying them into the future Kingdom of France. In North Africa, the Vandal kingdom remained powerful under the aging Genseric, who finally died in 477 after nearly 5 decades of rule. Spain is split among the Visigoths, Suebi, and the leftover Roman lands. Britain, abandoned by the Romans decades before, has seen the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes arrive, slowly forming their own kingdoms while displacing the Romanized British people. The map of Western Europe has been fundamentally redrawn. The unified imperial system was replaced by a patchwork of successor kingdoms, most ruled by Germanic peoples who adopted varying degrees of Roman culture and institutions. In 480 AD, another link to the Old Order was severed when Julius Nepos, still claiming to be the legitimate Western emperor from his refuge in Dalmatia, was assassinated by his own retainers. Odoacer seized the chance to annex Dalmatia to his kingdom, thereby enlarging his domain. For the subsequent 12 years, Odoacer effectively governed Italy, safeguarding its frontiers and even executing successful campaigns against the Rugens to the north. However, in Constantinople, a new danger to his status was arising. The Eastern Emperor Zeno had never been entirely at ease with Odoacer's autonomy in Italy. When conflicts arise with another Germanic group, the Ostrogoths offer Zeno an opportunity to achieve 2 goals simultaneously. As cousins to the Visigoths, who had sacked Rome in 410, the Ostrogoths were settled in the Balkans as allies of the Roman Federati. Their leader, Theodoric, was raised as a hostage in Constantinople and thus absorbed much of Roman culture and military training. However, relations between the Ostrogoths and the Eastern Empire worsened as Theodoric's people ravaged imperial territories. In 488 AD, Zeno presented Theodoric with an offer. If he led his people into Italy and deposed Odoacer, he could rule the peninsula as the emperor's representative. This was a convenient solution for Zeno. Either Theodoric defeats Odoacer, installing a barbarian king more loyal to Constantinople, or the two barbarian forces weaken each other, creating an opportunity for later imperial reassertion. Theodoric accepts the offer. In the autumn of 488, the entire Ostrogothic nation, warriors, women, children, and the elderly, begins the journey from the Balkans to Italy with all their possessions loaded on wagons. This migration is another instance akin to the Gothic crossing of the Danube a century prior, but this time sanctioned by imperial decree. You join a Roman diplomatic mission, traveling to meet Theodoric as your people traverse the Julian Alps into northeastern Italy. The Ostrogothic king commands your respect with his dignity and refinement. He speaks fluent Greek and Latin, wears attire blending Roman and Gothic styles, and possesses the confidence of someone educated in imperial courts. Tell your master Odoacer that I arrive by the emperor's order. Theodoric informs your party's leader. Italy requires only one ruler, and the emperor has selected me. If Odoacer yields, he might still receive clemency. However, Odoacer intends no surrender of the kingdom he has established. In August 489, he encountered Theodoric's troops at the Isonzo River near Aqua. Despite a brave struggle, Odoacer's army was defeated and forced to withdraw. A second engagement at Verona concluded similarly with Theodoric as victor. Odoacer retreated to Ravenna, the swamp city that had previously protected Western emperors from invasions. Its strong defenses and sea access for supplies allowed Ravenna to potentially withstand a siege for years. This is what ultimately happened. After initial maneuvers and skirmishes, including a surprise counterattack by Odoacer that temporarily drove Theodoric back, the conflict escalated into a prolonged siege of Ravenna starting in 490. The stalemate persisted for nearly 3 years. By early 493, both sides were exhausted. The war had devastated much of northern Italy, and neither ruler could claim a decisive advantage. Finally, with the mediation of the Bishop of Ravenna, Odoacer and Theodoric agreed to a compromise. They would rule Italy jointly, sharing power in a co-regency. On March 5, 493, Theodoric peacefully entered Ravenna to formalize this agreement. A great feast was prepared to celebrate the new arrangement. Having secured an invitation, you are eager to witness this historic reconciliation. The banquet hall is packed with the elites of both factions, Ostrogothic nobles, Odoacer's followers, and Roman officials who served both regimes. Theodoric and Odoacer sit at the head table, sharing wine and seemingly cordial conversation. The atmosphere is tense yet hopeful. Suddenly, Theodoric rises and approaches Odoacer. In a swift, shocking motion, he draws his sword and kills his co-ruler. Odoacer's men, deprived of their weapons before entering the banquet, are swiftly overwhelmed. The planned co-regency was a deception. Theodoric had intended to eliminate his rival and rule alone. Thus, all enemies of the Gothic people are destroyed. Theodoric announces to the stunned assembly, Rome now has a new master. In the following days, Odoacer's remaining supporters and family were hunted down and killed. This brief experiment in power-sharing ended in bloodshed, establishing a pattern that would repeat throughout the early medieval period as competing rulers vied for dominance. With Odoacer gone, he became the undisputed ruler of Italy. Although officially governing as the Eastern Emperor's representative, he effectively created an independent Ostrogothic kingdom with its capital at Ravenna. Theodoric's 33-year reign, ending with his death in 526, represents a pivotal period in post-Roman Italy. Instead of behaving like other barbarian leaders, he diligently sought to maintain Roman institutions and culture while holding his status as Gothic king. This required a delicate balance, being sufficiently Roman to appease the native populace yet retaining Gothic authority over his warriors. After several years observing Theodoric's Italy, you find much to admire in his governance. He maintains the Roman Senate and administrative system, employing educated Romans like Cassiodorus and Boethius in high government positions. Roman law remains applicable to the Roman populace, while Gothic customary law governs Theodoric's own people. He undertakes building projects, repairs infrastructure, and ensures food supplies for major cities. Gothic strength aims to safeguard Roman civilization, as stated by Theodoric in a public address you heard. This reflects his vision of employing Gothic military might to preserve the Roman culture and institutions he valued. However, challenges persist. Like Odoacer and many Gothic leaders, Theodoric was an Arian Christian, whereas the Roman population adhered to the Nicene Catholic Christianity, officially endorsed by both Eastern and Western empires since the Council of Nicaea in 325. This religious disparity established a lasting barrier between the Gothic rulers and their Roman subjects. Furthermore, despite Theodoric's claim to rule on behalf of the Eastern Emperor, relations with Constantinople remained fraught with complications. The Eastern Empire never fully recognized the legitimacy of Gothic rule in Italy, viewing it merely as a temporary arrangement. As the Goths consolidated power in Italy, similar developments occurred across the former Western provinces. Each successor kingdom developed its own method for merging Germanic leadership with Roman institutions and culture. Some, such as the Vandals in Africa, maintained a clearer distinction between conquerors and the conquered. Others, such as the Visigoths in Spain and southern Gaul, gradually moved toward greater integration. In northern Gaul, the Frankish king Clovis took a significant step that will influence centuries of European history. Unlike other Germanic rulers who either remained pagan or adopted Arian Christianity, Clovis converted to the faith of his Roman subjects, Christianity. His baptism around 496 AD established an alliance between Frankish military power and the Catholic Church that shaped the development of medieval France. By the early 6th century, the political landscape of Western Europe had stabilized into several major kingdoms: the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy under Theodoric, the Visigothic kingdom in Spain and southwestern Gaul, the Vandal kingdom in North Africa, and the Burgundian kingdom in southeastern Gaul. The Frankish kingdom expanded in northern Gaul, while various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms existed in Britain. The Eastern Roman Empire, now known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive, centered on Constantinople under Emperor Anastasius. It rebuilt its financial and military strength following the challenges of the 5th century. The East survived where the West largely collapsed, partly because its wealthier provinces remained intact. Its capital was more defensible, and it faced less continuous pressure from barbarian migrations. As you travel through this transformed Europe in the early 6th century, you find that while the Western Roman Empire has vanished as a political entity, its legacy remains powerful. Latin continues as the language of administration, law, and religion across most of the former Western provinces. Roman roads still connect cities. Roman architectural styles affect new buildings, albeit on a smaller scale. Christianity, Rome's final religion, continues to expand and gain influence. In many respects, the successor kingdoms portray themselves as heirs or restorers of Roman authority instead of its substitutes. Their rulers mint coins with Roman motifs, use Roman titles, and support scholars who safeguard and pass on Roman literary culture. The most obvious shift is the breakdown of political authority. The single administration that once ruled from Britain to Egypt is now supplanted by several rival powers, each commanding a segment of the former empire. Borders are less fixed, travel is less safe, and trade is more restricted. For commoners, this transition results in mixed outcomes. In some areas, tax obligations lessen as the complex imperial bureaucracy is eliminated. In other areas, novel forms of exploitation arise under the new authorities. Urban life suffers as cities diminish in size and relinquish some of their economic and cultural roles. The magnificent public structures of the Roman age, such as baths, theatres, and arenas, are either abandoned or repurposed. Nevertheless, there is also continuity. Most individuals persist in cultivating the same lands, observing the same religious rites, and adhering to many of the same customary practices as previously. The decline of imperial authority was not a single catastrophe, but a series of adaptations to shifting circumstances. One evening in Rome, under Theodoric's rule, you sit with an elderly senator on a hill overlooking the city. The forum below is growing quiet as the day ends. Many of its buildings are damaged or repurposed, yet it remains the recognizable core of ancient Rome. This is what the senator recalls from when Alaric and the Goths sacked the city. "I thought it was the end of the world. Then came the Vandals, Attila's threat, and the rise and fall of emperors like autumn leaves. Now there is a Gothic king who speaks Latin, builds churches, and calls himself a patrician Romanus. The world did not end, it simply changed." He gestures toward the setting sun, casting long shadows across the ancient monuments. Rome did not fall in a day, it transformed gradually over generations and has not truly vanished even now. Look around you. Its laws, its language, its faith endure. Though the empire may be gone, Rome lives on. As darkness falls over the eternal city, you ponder the senator's words. The story of Rome's decline is not merely destruction, but one of transformation and continuity. The Roman Empire in the West no longer exists as a political entity. However, the Roman world, its ideas, institutions, and cultural norms continues to shape the emerging medieval civilization that follows. The influence of Rome went beyond its armies and administration. Even when barbarian kings succeeded emperors, they governed in recognizable Roman styles, adopting rather than destroying the systems they inherited. In Constantinople, the eastern portion of the empire persisted, maintaining much of Roman custom while adapting to new difficulties. This intricate flow of change and persistence will unfold for many centuries. But as you watch the lamps illuminate a Rome that is both ancient and new, the immediate narrative of the Western Empire's demise is complete. The world of late antiquity slowly transitions into what we now term the early Middle Ages, marked by new rulers and distinct struggles, yet carrying many enduring echoes of Rome's legacy. Let us travel to Constantinople in the early 6th century. Unlike Rome, which had been sacked repeatedly and lost much of its former glory, Constantinople endures as a magnificent imperial capital. Guarded by immense walls and the Bosphorus Strait, the city has resisted barbarian threats that overwhelmed the western provinces. You arrive in Constantinople in 527 AD, a pivotal year for the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, as the aged Emperor Justin I has just appointed his nephew Justinian as co-emperor and successor. Within months, Justin dies, leaving Justinian as sole ruler of the still vast Eastern territories. Walking through Constantinople's bustling streets, you are struck by how Roman everything feels. Imperial officials in traditional robes, public ceremonies adhering to ancient protocols. Latin persists for official matters, though Greek is increasingly common in daily life. The Eastern Empire views itself not as a new entity, but as the direct heir to the Roman legacy, temporarily severed from its Western domains. Within the Grand Palace complex, you witness the new emperor holding court. Justinian is middle-aged, possessing a serious demeanor and calculating eyes. Though not physically imposing, he radiates intelligence and determination. Beside him stands his remarkable wife, Empress Theodora, a woman of humble beginnings who has ascended to become perhaps the most powerful woman in the empire's history. An imperial secretary confirms this as you watch. The empress is far more than a mere consort. She commands the emperor's attention and possesses her own extensive network of influence. Some even claim she is stronger-willed than Justinian himself. You soon learn that Justinian harbored ambitious plans, as previous Eastern emperors largely accepted the loss of the Western provinces, deeming them too costly to reclaim. Justinian dreamed of restoring the unified empire under a single ruler, as was the case before Theodosius divided it among his sons in 395. The emperor believed it was his divine mission to restore Roman rule to the West. The secretary continued. He viewed the barbarian kingdoms as temporary aberrations, illegal occupiers of Roman territory. With the Vandal kingdom in Africa weakened by succession disputes and Theoderic's death causing instability in Italy, the moment seemed ripe for reconquest. But before any military campaign began, another crisis engulfed Constantinople. In January 532 AD, a routine sports rivalry between the blue and green chariot racing factions transforms into the massive urban riot known as the Annae Revolt. For 5 days, the city approaches revolution as the mob burns public structures and declares a rival emperor. You observe this chaos from a relatively secure location near the harbor. As flames engulfed parts of the city center, Justinian, held up in the palace with his advisors, considered fleeing the capital. In this moment of crisis, his Empress Theodora stole her husband's resolve with words that will be remembered for centuries. Royal purple made a fine burial shroud. In essence, she declared it better to die as emperor than to live as a fugitive. Emboldened, Justinian commands his loyal general Belisarius to crush the revolt with any force required. The resulting massacre in the Hippodromium kills tens of thousands but secures Justinian's throne. From this devastation, Justinian initiates an ambitious rebuilding program. Central to this is the construction of a new cathedral, Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom, designed to exceed all prior architectural feats. You marvel over the next 5 years as this revolutionary building takes shape. Its massive dome appears to float above the ground with minimal visible support. Completed in 537 AD, Hagia Sophia embodies Justinian's imperial and religious vision. It is a perfect blend of Roman engineering, Greek aesthetics, and Christian symbolism. Upon entering the finished cathedral, Justinian reportedly exclaims, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." But grand buildings are only part of Justinian's legacy. More significant is his codification of Roman law, the collection, organization, and clarification of centuries of legal precedents and imperial edicts. This resulting body of civil law will endure as the foundation for legal systems across Europe for over a millennium. The emperor works tirelessly. An official in the legal project informs you. He personally reviews code sections, engages in debates with legal scholars, and demands clarity and consistency. He asserts that true civilization requires law. As these domestic projects advance, Justinian shifts focus to his dream of reconquest, targeting the Vandal kingdom in North Africa, once Rome's granary and a wealthy region, even after a century of Vandal control. In 533 AD, following careful planning and favorable conditions, Vandal King Gela was occupied with a rebellion in Sardinia. Justinian dispatched a relatively small expeditionary force of about 15,000 men, led by his trusted general Belisarius. You secure permission to join the fleet as an observer, keen to see if this ambitious campaign will succeed where the massive 468 expedition failed so disastrously. The Byzantine forces landed near Carthage, facing little resistance. In contrast to the prior Roman effort, Belisarius's campaign emphasized meticulous intelligence, rigorous discipline, and tactical adaptability. The general fostered amicable ties with the local Roman populace, framing his objective as liberation instead of subjugation. Following two crucial engagements at Edessum and Chamarum, Belisarius triumphed over the Vandal forces and captured King Gela. By March 534, the entire Vandal kingdom was incorporated into the empire. The conquest, thought impossible for generations, was achieved in less than a year. You witnessed Belisarius's triumph when he returned to Constantinople with the captured Vandal king and the treasures of Carthage, including most significantly the sacred vessels of Jerusalem's temple, which the Romans had taken in 70 AD, then brought to Rome, and subsequently seized by the Vandals during their sack of the city in 455. Now these holy relics are returned to imperial possession, seemingly confirming divine favor for Justinian's restoration project. Encouraged by this success, Justinian turns his attention to Italy, where conditions appear favorable. Thierry the Great died in 526, and his kingdom had been weakened by succession disputes. His grandson Athalaric succeeded him but died young, leaving his mother Amalus Sununtha as regent. When she was murdered in 535 at the instigation of her cousin Theoda, Justinian had a perfect pretext for intervention. Once again, Belisarius leads a relatively small force, landing in Sicily in 535 and quickly securing the island. He then moves to mainland Italy, capturing Naples and Rome with surprising ease. By December 536, the Byzantine army enters Rome, welcomed by many of its citizens as liberators, restoring legitimate imperial rule. You join the Byzantine forces in Rome, where the mood is initially triumphant. But unlike the swift Vandal campaign, the Gothic War becomes a protracted, devastating conflict. The Ostrogoths rally under a new leader, the capable Totila, and the fighting seesaws across the Italian peninsula for nearly 2 decades. This is not the glorious restoration the emperor promised. Laments a Byzantine officer as you huddle in a half-ruined Roman villa outside the contested city of Ravenna. We control cities one day, lose them the next. The countryside is devastated, the population starves. And for what? To change one master for another. Indeed, the prolonged conflict inflicts terrible damage on Italy. Rome itself changes hands multiple times and is at one point almost entirely depopulated. Agricultural production collapses as farms are abandoned or destroyed. By 552, when the Byzantine general Narses finally defeated the Ostrogoths at the Battle of Tegani, killing Totila, Italy was so thoroughly ravaged that the reconquest seemed at best a trick. The peninsula now enjoyed firmly imperial control, yet it was a shadow of its former self, depopulated and impoverished, as ancient aqueducts, bridges, and public buildings suffered damage that would never be fully repaired. In 55-4, Justinian's final western reconquest secured parts of southern Spain from the Visigothic kingdom, bringing control over Africa, Italy, and various islands including Sicily, Sardinia, and the Balearics. This control established a Mediterranean empire that somewhat resembled the former Roman domain. Returning to Constantinople during the later years of Justinian's reign, you find the aging emperor still pursuing his vision of restoration, but increasingly preoccupied with religious issues. His efforts to reconcile the empire's Christian factions have yielded little success, and doctrinal disagreements persist, fostering political divisions, particularly in Egypt and Syria. The court theologian explains that the emperor views the unity of faith as vital for the empire's strength, observed during Justinian's deep discussions with bishops and religious scholars. However, achieving this unity proved as challenging as reconquering the West, perhaps more so. In 565 AD, after a reign of 38 years, Emperor Justinian died. His ambitious restoration project secured significant territorial gains, but at a tremendous cost. The treasury is exhausted, the army is thinly spread, and newly conquered lands are unstable. Furthermore, new dangers are arising. In Italy, the Germanic Lombards will soon invade the war-weakened peninsula, ultimately taking much of the territory painfully reclaimed by Justinian's generals. In the east, the Persian Sasanian Empire poses a constant threat, while a new religion, Islam, will soon arise from Arabia to fundamentally reshape the Mediterranean world. Within a century of Justinian's death, much of his territorial restoration will be reversed. Egypt, Syria, North Africa, and eventually much of Italy will slip outside imperial control. However, his legal and architectural legacies will persist much longer than his conquests. During Justinian's reign and the preceding tumultuous era, you have witnessed another powerful force preserving Roman traditions while adapting them to new conditions. Once a persecuted minority religion, Christianity became Rome's official faith in the 4th century under Emperor Theodosius I. By the time the Western Empire collapsed, the Church had developed a sophisticated organizational structure that mirrored and frequently collaborated with imperial administration. As Roman political authority fractured in the 5th century, bishops frequently filled the void, taking charge of governance, justice, and public welfare within their cities. The Church safeguarded Latin literacy, sustained global ties via its hierarchy, and offered institutional stability amidst political turmoil. You witness this process most clearly in Rome, where the bishop, increasingly referred to as the Pope or Father, emerged as the city's most influential figure after imperial authority receded. Pope Leo II, who helped persuade the empire to spare Rome in 452, and Pope Gregory the Great, who strengthened papal administration and missionary activity, exemplify this new leadership. In the successor kingdoms, the relationship between barbarian rulers and the Catholic Church varied. The Franks under Clovis adopted Christianity, aligning themselves with Roman subjects and the papacy. The Visigoths and Ostrogoths, as Arians, maintained a distance from the Catholic hierarchy. While Theodoric demonstrated religious tolerance in Italy, the Vandals in North Africa pursued a stricter policy, persecuting Catholics and exiling bishops who resisted Arian dominance. Persecution ceased only with Belisarius's reconquest and the restoration of imperial and Catholic authority. Amidst these shifts, monasticism emerged as a vital movement preserving Roman cultural achievements. You can visit Monte Cassino, where Benedict of Nuria founded his monastery around 529, establishing a rule for monastic life that balanced prayer, manual labor, and intellectual pursuits. In these monastic communities, ancient texts are preserved and copied, classical learning maintained, and a new synthesis of Roman and Christian culture developed. A scholarly abbot tells you as he shows you the monastery's growing library of carefully copied manuscripts that without the monks, much of ancient wisdom would have perished. Here we preserve Virgil and Cicero alongside Scripture and the Church Fathers. All knowledge is worthy if it leads to greater understanding of God's creation. The preservation of classical learning manifests differently throughout the former empire. In Italy and Gaul, monasteries served as hubs for Latin literary culture. In the Byzantine East, possessing a more robust urban tradition, education remained more secularized, with schools in Constantinople continuing to teach both classical Greek and Christian texts. The role of Christianity in safeguarding Roman civilization is intricate. While the Church preserved many Roman institutional practices and intellectual traditions, it also adapted them to Christian priorities. Classical temples were converted into churches, and pagan festivals were repurposed as Christian holy days. Roman administrative districts became ecclesiastical dioceses. By the late 6th century, as you conclude your journey through this transformative period, the Mediterranean world had profoundly changed from the unified Roman Empire of centuries prior. Political fragmentation is the current state, with the Byzantine Empire controlling the eastern Mediterranean and Germanic kingdoms dominating the west. Latin persists as the language of law, administration, and religion in the west, while Greek prevails in the east. Christianity offers cultural continuity across these political divisions, though theological differences between East and West are emerging. Trade has lessened but remains along established routes. Urban life has shrunk but persists, particularly in the eastern Mediterranean. Most notably, the concept of the Roman Empire as the singular political order has been supplanted by more intricate structures of power and authority. Byzantine emperors maintain claims to universal sovereignty, though their control is limited to parts of the former imperial territory. Germanic kings act as autonomous monarchs, yet frequently recognize a theoretical imperial superiority. The Church, especially the papacy, increasingly claims spiritual authority beyond secular limits. In this new era, various regions pursue different trajectories. The Byzantine East retains closer ties to Roman imperial traditions, sustaining a sophisticated urban civilization with centralized governance and significant commerce. North Africa, having been reconquered by Justinian, will soon encounter the profound influence of Arab Islamic conquest. Italy, shattered by the Gothic War and later invaded by the Lombards, faced further upheaval while retaining much of Roman culture, particularly within the Church. Gaul, under Frankish control, evolved a mixed civilization blending Roman structures with Germanic governance. Spain's Visigothic kingdom achieved a distinct fusion of Roman and Germanic heritage before succumbing to the Islamic conquest in the early 8th century. Britain, abandoned by Roman forces in the early 5th century and subsequently settled by Anglo-Saxons, has fewer direct Roman influences, although Christianity will ultimately link it to the wider post-Roman world. Your exploration of the fall of Rome and its consequences demonstrates that this period was not merely one of decline and disaster, but rather a process of transformation, adaptation, and continuity amidst change. The world born from the collapse of Roman political authority in the West was not a dark age of ignorance and barbarism, as later writers sometimes depicted, but rather a complex societal reorganization that preserved much while innovating in response to new conditions. As you visit Rome one final time, now a Byzantine outpost, much diminished from its imperial glory, yet still revered as an apostolic see and repository of ancient monuments. Reflecting on this historical shift, one sees the lessons. The Colosseum, once a site of gladiatorial fights, is now quiet. The Forum, once the center of world rule, is slowly changing through nature and human use. The Pantheon, a temple to the gods, is now a Christian church. However, looking past these physical shifts, you grasp that Rome's greatest legacy resides not in structures or lines, but in concepts and systems. The Roman law codified by Justinian has influenced legal systems for millennia. Roman administrative practices, adapted by the Church and successor kingdoms, established frameworks for governance across Europe. Roman architectural and engineering techniques continue to shape the built environment. Roman literary culture, preserved in monastic libraries, will eventually fuel the Renaissance's rediscovery of classical learning. Most importantly, the idea of Rome as the embodiment of civilization, order, and universal authority endures long after the political reality it once symbolized vanishes. For centuries, rulers like Charlemagne, Otto the Great, and the Byzantine emperors will assume the mantle of Rome, pursuing legitimacy through its ancient prestige. In the early medieval mind, Rome never truly falls, it merely transforms, sleeps, or passes its authority to new authorities. The concept of the eternal city and the universal empire it governed continues to inspire and motivate politics, religion, and culture, long after the final Western emperor ceded his symbols to Odoacer. As you complete this crucial historical period, you remember the words of that aged Roman senator who stated that Rome did not fall swiftly. What you have observed is not a collapse, but a slow transformation. The classical world gradually transformed into the medieval era, with Roman elements merged with Germanic, Christian, and Byzantine influences to establish the foundations of European civilization. As the sun sets over the 7 hills of Rome, long shadows stretch across ancient monuments and newer Christian churches. In the gathering darkness, the spectral outlines of the various realms that have occupied this site almost appear. The Republic of Cicero, the Empire of Augustus, the Christian capital of Constantine, the Gothic kingdom of Theodoric, and the Byzantine Duchy after Justinian's reconquest, all these iterations of Rome have shaped the complex legacy that will define the centuries ahead. As stars emerge in the twilight sky, one perceives that though empires rise and fall, their influence persists in both the manifest and the hidden. The history of Rome's transformation illustrates that historical change is seldom straightforward or absolute. Previous patterns endure alongside new ones, weaving a rich fabric of continuity and innovation that resists simple classification. Picture ourselves in a lovely garden in 6th century Ravenna, that swampy city which functioned as the Western imperial seat, and subsequently as the Ostrogothic court. As evening falls, lanterns illuminate mosaics of emperors, Christ, and saints in glittering gold and rich colors. These images symbolize the fusion of Roman imperial tradition, Christian faith, and Germanic rule defining this transitional age. While admiring these artistic treasures, we must ask a fundamental question. Why did the Western Roman Empire collapse? For centuries, historians have debated this question, proposing various explanations from moral decline and Christianity to lead poisoning and climate change. However, by examining this period, following historian Peter Heather's detailed analysis, we can pinpoint several interconnected factors that account for this monumental transformation. Primarily, and most importantly, the Roman Empire encountered mounting external pressure from groups outside its boundaries. These barbarian groups, including the Goths, Vandals, Huns, and others, were not merely mindless hordes driven by destruction, as Roman writers frequently depicted them. Instead, they constituted complex societies with distinct cultures, political structures, and motivations. Crucially, these societies had been shaped by centuries of contact with Rome. Roman trade, diplomacy, and military engagement beyond the frontiers progressively enhanced the sophistication and organization of neighboring peoples. Germanic tribal confederations expanded and unified, partly due to Roman influence and pressure. By the 4th century, groups such as the Goths had established more stable leadership and military strengths, making them more formidable enemies than the dispersed tribes Rome encountered in earlier centuries. Rome consequently created its own adversary, an elderly Gothic warrior encountered during Roman travel. Through teaching us Roman methods, engaging us in trade, and pitting one tribe against another, the empire forged us into a stronger, more united, and more Roman in thought. We learned to operate as larger entities, to plan campaigns, and to employ Roman tactics against Rome itself. This observation is consistent with what we experienced throughout our journey. Barbarian leaders such as Alaric, Gaiseric, and Theodoric, who grasped Roman politics and military strategies, spoke Latin and often sought not to destroy Rome, but to secure a position within its system. In many ways, they were products of Rome's success in expanding its influence beyond its formal borders. The arrival of the Huns from Central Asia in the late 4th century was the catalyst that transformed these increasingly sophisticated neighbors into an existential threat. As the story began, Hunnish pressure drove Gothic refugees to the Danube in 376, initiating the sequence of events leading to the disaster at Adrianople. The Hunnish Empire, under Alar, represented a novel form of threat. A military force capable of projecting power across vast distances, simultaneously pressuring multiple frontier regions and disrupting the delicate balance Rome maintained with its Germanic neighbors. Even following Attila's death and the decline of Hunnic power, the demographic shifts and population movements they had caused were irreversible. However, external pressure alone cannot account for Rome's downfall. Despite having faced and overcome serious external threats in previous centuries, the empire's ability to respond effectively to these challenges had changed. This shift stemmed from the evolution of the Roman military system, which transformed from the citizen legions of the Republic to the professional army of the early empire, and finally to the frontier forces and mobile field armies of the late empire. These later armies increasingly depended on recruiting barbarian soldiers, either individually or in full units, as federati serving under their own leaders. While this system provided essential manpower, it also introduced vulnerabilities due to divided loyalties. There were insufficient Roman recruits to staff the legions. A recruitment officer in Gaul had noted that old military traditions had waned, as wealthy families now purchased exemptions for their sons. Provincial landowners concealed potential recruits to ensure continued labor on the fields. Consequently, the Romans turned to barbarians who proved to be capable soldiers. Serving in the Roman army offered these recruits opportunities unavailable in their homelands. This reliance on barbarian troops became especially problematic as the empire's financial resources declined. The loss of wealthy provinces, especially North Africa, to the Vandals in 439 stripped the Western Empire of essential tax revenue required to fund its military. This initiated a downward spiral. Diminished resources caused military weakness, which led to further territorial losses and a subsequent reduction in resources. Political instability exacerbated these difficulties. During the 5th century, the Western Empire was plagued by frequent usurpations, civil wars, and assassinations. These internal conflicts frequently overshadowed external dangers from rival Roman factions, as some groups even allied with barbarian tribes against their domestic foes. We saw a prime example of this self-destructive habit when Emperor Valentinian III killed his competent general Aetius in 454, eliminating the Western Empire's most effective military commander just a year after Attila's death eased Hunnic pressure. Valentinian's own murder 6 months later caused another succession crisis, further diminishing the empire's capacity to confront barbarian invasions. The Eastern Empire, centered on Constantinople, endured and transformed into the Byzantine Empire, despite facing similar pressures. This divergence is explained by several factors. The East possessed greater financial resources, more defensible geography, especially Constantinople, and experienced less relentless barbarian pressure than the West. Furthermore, it benefited from a more stable imperial succession and maintained more effective control over its military forces. Throughout our history, the fall of Rome was a complex process spanning over a century, involving more than just military defeat. It encompassed political accommodation, cultural exchange, and gradual institutional change. The barbarian kingdoms that succeeded direct imperial rule in the West were not purely foreign impositions, but hybrid entities blending Germanic leadership with Roman administration, law, and culture. This reveals another crucial insight. Many facets of Roman civilization persisted beyond the empire's political structure. Latin remained the language of governance, learning, and faith across the former Western provinces. Roman law continued to shape legal systems throughout Europe. The Catholic Church both preserved and modified Roman organizational frameworks. Roman architectural and engineering methods were still employed, albeit often on a smaller scale. Even the notion of the Roman Empire as a universal civilizing force endured long after its actual reality was unrecognizable. For centuries, rulers from Charlemagne to the Byzantine emperors claimed lineage from Rome, pursuing legitimacy in its ancient prestige. In our exploration, we also examined how the rise of Christianity intersected with Rome's transformation. The empire's official adoption of Christianity under Emperor Theodosius II in the late 4th century coincided with intensifying barbarian pressures. This timing has led some observers to suggest Christianity weakened Rome's traditional martial virtues or diverted resources from the military to religious ends. Nevertheless, the link between Christianity and Rome's decline is much more intricate. The new faith offered institutional continuity amidst political upheaval, with bishops frequently taking on civic leadership as imperial authority diminished. Monasteries safeguarded classical knowledge while establishing novel educational methods. The Church's hierarchy, partly mirroring imperial administration, sustained links across fracturing political borders. The empire remains intact. A bishop in Gaul informed you during your travels. It has been baptized. Christ now reigns where Caesar once ruled, and his kingdom shall have no end. This view represents one perspective on Rome's transformation, viewing it not as a catastrophic collapse, but as a providential transition to a new Christian order. This interpretation gained influence throughout the Middle Ages as ecclesiastical writers wove Rome's story into a broader narrative of divine providence guiding human history. For ordinary people experiencing these changes, the impact varied greatly based on location, social standing, and the time period. In some areas, such as Britain, Roman rule ended suddenly, causing major cultural and material shifts. In other places, like southern Italy, continuity was more apparent, as Roman elites frequently retained their power under new Germanic rulers. Urban life generally diminished as cities contracted in size and relinquished some civic roles. Trade routes shrank, though they persisted. Literacy spread less widely, remaining concentrated among ecclesiastical and administrative elites. Grand building projects became infrequent, with resources shifting toward churches over secular structures. Nevertheless, everyday life continued amidst these shifts. Farmers still tilled their fields, though perhaps paying taxes to a Gothic king instead of a Roman emperor. Artisans still practiced their crafts, though markets were more localized. Children were still born. People married, aged, and died. The fundamental rhythms of human existence continued regardless of who claimed sovereignty. My grandfather served in the imperial administration, my father advised the Visigothic court, and now I assist the bishop. A Roman aristocrat in southern Gaul taught that rulers shift, but we adapt. We keep the valuable from the past while securing our present standing. This pragmatic method defined how many Romans managed the empire's changes. Instead of resisting change, they preserved their cultural identity and social status within new political systems. Roman senators held government roles. Roman legal expertise aided in codifying laws for Visigothic kings. Roman bishops bestowed blessings upon Frankish rulers. Viewing this history across the centuries reveals that the fall of Rome was not an end, but a transition, complex, uneven, sometimes violent, yet also creative and adaptive. The classical world did not disappear, rather, it gradually transformed into the medieval world, preserving many features while reconfiguring them into novel arrangements. The enduring strength of Rome lay in its adaptability. Roman concepts concerning law, governance, architecture, literature, and religion were adopted and altered by those who had never lived under Roman dominion. Although the empire had physical boundaries, its cultural impact stretched far beyond its borders and persisted long after its political demise. Thus, Rome attained a form of immortality, not as an unbroken political entity, but as a cultural model and reference point. For over a millennium after the final Western emperor ceded his symbols to Odoacer, European rulers continued to look to Rome for examples and legitimacy. Renaissance humanists enthusiastically rediscovered classical texts with awe. Modern nation-states adopted Roman symbols and architectural styles for their administrations. Even now, words from Latin enrich our vocabulary. Legal concepts in our justice systems stem from Roman courts. The legacy of Rome continues to influence our views on empire, civilization, and historical shifts. This leads us to what may be the most crucial question at the end of this journey. What lessons can we draw from Rome's decline that apply to our present? First, we could consider how civilizations generally avoid sudden or total collapses. Despite devastating military losses and territorial defeats, the idea of Rome persisted and evolved. Cultural influence frequently surpasses political control, and societies demonstrate a remarkable capacity for adaptation and reconstruction. What one view perceives as decline may represent transformation and renewal from another. Furthermore, Rome's experience illustrates that no system, regardless of its success or longevity, is immune to change, as it appeared permanent for centuries. The Eternal City, at the heart of an apparently invulnerable empire, gradually transformed due to external pressures and internal flaws, evolving into something its founders barely anticipated. Success, in turn, posed new challenges, as Rome learned when its cultural impact spurred neighboring groups to develop more advanced social and military structures. Third, we can appreciate that historical change often stems from complex interactions rather than simple causes. Rome did not fall due to moral decay, lead poisoning, Christianity, or any single factor. It resulted from interconnected developments, including the Hunnish migration, pressuring Germanic peoples, who in turn pressured Roman frontiers, financial strains that reduced military effectiveness, political instability that undermined coordinated responses to threats, and many other factors operating in intricate feedback loops. Ultimately, Rome's fall serves as a reminder of history's contingency, how differently events might have unfolded with slight changes in circumstances or decisions. What if Emperor Valens had awaited reinforcements before fighting the Goths at Adrianople? What if Stilicho had not been executed before Alaric's invasion of Italy? What if the massive 468 expedition against the Vandals had successfully reclaimed North Africa? History is not fixed, but is forged by numerous choices, random events, and the interplay of structural forces in unpredictable manners. Throughout this transformative period, our journey reveals Rome not as a static entity that simply collapsed, but as a dynamic civilization constantly adapting to new challenges with varying degrees of success. The end of the Western Roman Empire did not signify the end of Roman influence or the beginning of a dark age of complete barbarism. Rather, it signaled the start of new cultural synthesis and political structures that would eventually form medieval European civilization. Our imaginary garden in Ravenna, where we began tonight's reflection, perfectly embodies this continuity amidst transformation. The mosaics surrounding us integrate classical Roman artistic methods with Christian themes, commissioned by Germanic rulers. These structures, some repurposed from Roman origins and others newly constructed with Roman features, exemplify the creative adaptation defining this transitional period. As evening falls and stars emerge over our garden, reflect on how Rome's transformation provides a more nuanced view of historical change than simple rise and fall narratives. Civilizations rarely disappear. They evolve, their components merging into fresh configurations. Their legacies continue to influence subsequent societies in both obvious and subtle ways. Rome's greatest achievement may not have been conquering the Mediterranean, but the cultural template it established, flexible enough to be adopted and modified by peoples from Britain to Mesopotamia, and resilient enough to endure the empire's political fragmentation. Thus, Rome never truly fell, its influence passed to new torchbearers who carried its flame in different forms. As we finish our exploration of this crucial time in human history, remember not only the dramatic events and vivid characters, but also a deeper understanding of history's complexity. The decline of Rome shows that historical change is seldom straightforward or immediate. It is a slow evolution of change, adjusting, adapting, and persisting despite upheaval. As you drift off to sleep, you might dream of the ancient Romans and their surrounding tribes, not as figures from a distant past, but as people like us, facing uncertainty and navigating change, preserving what they valued while adapting to new realities. Their world became ours through countless small, barely perceptible transitions, each revolutionary in their cumulative effect. And who knows, 1,000 years hence, people may view our era with similar curiosity, pondering how our civilization shifted and what aspects endured through transformations we cannot yet conceive. History's study teaches us that we too are part of an unfolding narrative, one where the past never fully vanishes and the present perpetually becomes the past for those to come. Good night, and may historical wisdom guide your dreams.